Caleb Reese never expected that helping a stranded stranger during the worst blizzard in decades would change his life forever. All he saw was a luxury sedan buried in snow on the side of Highway 94, steam rising from under the hood, and beside it, a woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers, not stuck on a frozen road in the middle of nowhere. She introduced herself simply as Claire Cooper, just another driver caught in the storm. But Caleb would soon discover she wasn't just another wealthy traveler. She was the secret heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the country. And the keys she handed him the next day weren't just to any house, they were to a world he never imagined possible. What started as a simple act of kindness would pull Caleb into a whirlwind of luxury, danger, and a connection that defied every rule of his carefully controlled life. But when powerful enemies emerged to tear them apart, will their bond survive the storm? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights flickered in the cramped garage bay as Caleb Reese tightened the final lug nut on Mrs. Patterson's ancient Toyota Corolla. Outside, the December wind howled through the streets of Millbrook, rattling the thin metal walls of Cedar Point Auto Repair like a ghost demanding entry. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 hours, and the weather forecasters were calling it the storm of the decade. Caleb wiped his grease-stained hands on his coveralls and glanced at the cracked digital clock mounted above his workbench. 9:47 p.m. Another 16-hour day in the books, and for what? $83 in labor charges that would barely cover a third of tomorrow's expenses. The stack of overdue bills on his desk seemed to grow taller every time he looked at it. Utilities, rent for the garage, groceries, and the notice from Emmett's school about unpaid lunch fees that made his chest tighten with shame. 3 years ago, Caleb Reese had been living a completely different life. He'd worked as a senior mechanical engineer for Titan Automotive, designing advanced engine systems for luxury vehicles and pulling down a salary that afforded him and his family a comfortable suburban lifestyle. His wife, Rachel, had been a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and their son, Emmett, was just starting kindergarten in one of the best school districts in the state. Then everything fell apart in the span of 18 months. First came Rachel's diagnosis, aggressive breast cancer that required immediate and extensive treatment. Caleb burned through vacation days and sick leave to be with her during chemotherapy sessions. The medical bills piled up faster than their insurance could process claims, and even with coverage, the out-of-pocket expenses were crushing. When Titan Automotive downsized during an economic slump, Caleb's position was eliminated, taking their primary income and health benefits with it. Rachel fought bravely for 2 years, but the cancer eventually won. After her funeral, Caleb discovered that the medical debt had consumed not just their savings, but had forced them into bankruptcy. The house went into foreclosure. Caleb's professional reputation suffered during his extended absences, and suddenly he found himself a widower with a traumatized 8-year-old son and no clear path forward. He'd moved to Millbrook because the rent was cheap and the previous owner of Cedar Point Auto Repair was desperate to sell. Caleb had scraped together enough money from selling Rachel's jewelry and their remaining possessions to make a down payment on the struggling business. He'd thought he could turn it around, maybe even expand it, give Emmett some stability while he rebuilt their lives. But small-town auto repair was nothing like automotive engineering. Most of his customers drove vehicles that were barely holding together, and they paid in cash counted out in worn bills and loose change. Instead of designing cutting-edge fuel injection systems, Caleb spent his days patching exhaust pipes with beer cans and keeping 20-year-old engines running with whatever parts he could find at the salvage yard. The worst part wasn't the long, Hours or the financial stress, it was watching Emmett grow up too fast. At 11 years old, his son had learned to make his own breakfast, walk himself to school, and spend afternoons alone in the apartment above the garage, doing homework by himself. Caleb tried to be present, but there was always another car that needed fixing, another customer who couldn't pay full price, another crisis that demanded his immediate attention. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Caleb's heart sank when he saw Emmett's name on the screen. "Dad, I made the winter choir concert tomorrow night. I'm singing a solo. Can you come?" Caleb stared at the message, guilt washing over him like a cold wave. He'd missed Emmett's last 3 school events because of work emergencies. Each time, he'd promised himself it wouldn't happen again, but somehow it always did. There was always a customer who needed their car fixed immediately, always a financial crisis that demanded his attention. He typed back quickly, "Of course, buddy, wouldn't miss it for anything, so proud of you." But even as he sent the message, Caleb wondered if he was making another promise he couldn't keep. The forecast was calling for the worst blizzard in decades, and if the storm hit as hard as predicted, half the town would need emergency repairs just to get their cars running again. Every service call represented money they desperately needed. Dunno. Wind outside intensified, and snow began accumulating on the grimy windows of the garage. On the radio, the emergency weather service was issuing travel advisories and warning residents to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. Caleb looked around the cluttered shop that had become both his livelihood and his prison. The concrete floor was permanently stained with decades of oil spills and hydraulic fluid. His tool collection was a mix of quality equipment from his engineering, days and second-hand replacements he'd bought at pawn shops. The waiting area consisted of 3 mismatched chairs and a coffee table covered with automotive magazines from 2018. This wasn't the life he'd planned for himself or his son, but it was honest work, and Caleb had learned to find dignity in solving problems with his hands, even when those problems paid barely enough to keep food on the table. Every car he fixed meant someone else could get to work, get to medical appointments, or pick up their own kids from school. In a town like Millbrook, where most people lived paycheck to paycheck, that mattered. Caleb locked up Mrs. Patterson's Toyota and turned off the overhead lights. The storm was getting worse, and the smart thing would be to close up shop and head upstairs to check on Emmett's homework. But as he reached for the main power switch, his landline rang. He hesitated. Emergency calls after 10 o'clock usually meant someone was stranded somewhere, and stranded customers paid premium rates. They also paid in cash, which meant money he could put toward Emmett's school fees or the stack of bills threatening to bury them both. Against his better judgment, Caleb picked up the phone. "Cedar Point Auto Repair," he answered. "Thank God someone answered," a woman's voice said, and even through the static and wind noise, Caleb could hear the panic in her tone. "My car broke down on Highway 94, about 10 miles north of town. I'm completely stranded, and the storm is getting worse." Caleb looked out at the swirling snow and checked the clock again. Every instinct told him to refer her to the state police or suggest she call a tow truck in the morning, but something in her voice, desperation mixed with genuine fear, made him reconsider. "Ma'am, it's pretty dangerous out there right now," he said. "Are you in a safe location? I'm pulled off the road, but my car won't start, and I can't see more than a few feet in any direction. Please, I'll pay whatever it takes. I just need help." Caleb closed his eyes and thought about Emmett sleeping upstairs, about the concert. Tomorrow night, about all the reasons he should say no. Then he thought about Rachel and what she would have said about leaving someone stranded in a blizzard. "Okay," he said, grabbing his keys and the heavy winter coat hanging by the door. "I'm on my way. Stay in your car and keep the hazard lights on if they're still working." As Caleb fired up his tow truck and pulled out into the worst storm Millbrook had seen in 30 years, He had no idea that this single decision would change not just his night, but the entire trajectory of his and Emmett's lives forever. The drive to Highway 94 was treacherous beyond anything Caleb had experienced in his 3 years living in Millbrook. His tow truck's headlights barely penetrated the wall of swirling snow that seemed to attack from every direction. The windshield wipers struggled against the accumulating ice, creating streaky arcs that distorted his vision and made every shadow look like an obstacle. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts, warning all non-essential vehicles to stay off the roads. But Caleb pressed forward, following the faint yellow lines that marked the edge of the pavement. 23 minutes into the drive, his headlights caught something that made him pump the brakes carefully. Through the blizzard, he could make out the ghostly outline of a vehicle pulled onto the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly like a lighthouse beacon in the storm. As he got closer, Caleb's eyes widened. This wasn't the beat-up pickup, truck or aging sedan he'd expected to find stranded on a night like this. It was a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the kind of luxury sedan that cost more than most people in Millbrook made in 2 years. The deep black paint was nearly invisible against the storm, but the distinctive lines and chrome accents were unmistakable. Steam rose from beneath the hood, and snow had already begun to accumulate on the windshield and roof. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Caleb pulled his tow truck behind the Mercedes and grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and toolbox from the cab. The moment he stepped outside, the wind hit him like a physical blow, driving snow into his face with stinging force. The temperature had to be at least 15 below zero, and the wind chill made it feel even colder. He pulled his knit cap down over his ears and trudged toward the stranded vehicle. As he approached the driver's side window, it lowered with the quiet hum of expensive engineering. The woman behind the wheel was nothing like what Caleb had expected. When he'd heard her voice on the phone, she appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and striking green eyes that reflected intelligence and determination. Even in the chaos of the storm, she maintained an air of composed elegance that seemed completely out of place on a frozen highway in the middle of nowhere. She was wearing what looked like a cashmere coat over a tailored business suit. And her leather gloves appeared to be designer quality. Everything about her suggested wealth and sophistication, from the way she held herself to the subtle confidence in her voice when she spoke. "Thank you so much for coming out in this weather," she said, and Caleb could hear genuine relief mixed with something that might have been surprise. "I wasn't sure anyone would be willing to make the drive." "No problem," Caleb replied, raising his voice to be heard over the howling wind. "I'm Caleb from Cedar Point Auto Repair. What seems to be the issue?" She extended a gloved hand through the window. "Claire Cooper. The engine just started overheating about 15 minutes ago, then died completely. I managed to coast to the shoulder, but now it won't turn over at all." Caleb shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way she looked directly at him when she spoke. Most of his wealthy customers, the few he'd encountered, had a way of looking through him as if he were invisible. Claire Cooper was different. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" he asked. "Please do whatever you need to do. I'm completely at your mercy here." Caleb popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. In the harsh glare of his flashlight, antifreeze was clearly visible pooled beneath the engine, and the radiator. Jose had split along a seam that had probably been weakening for months. It was a relatively simple fix, but one that required immediate attention to prevent serious engine damage. "Good news and bad news," he called over the wind as he returned to her window. "The good news is it's just a split radiator hose, which I can fix. The bad news is we need to let the engine cool down completely before I can replace it, and that's going to take at least 30 minutes in this cold." Claire's face showed concern, but not panic. How long will the actual repair take? Maybe 20 minutes once I can get to it. But you can't stay in the car with the engine off for that long in this weather. You'll freeze. Caleb hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even him. Look, I've got a thermos of coffee in my truck, and the heater's working fine. Why? Don't you wait in there while I get the parts ready? Claire studied his face for a moment, as if weighing her options. That's very kind of you, but are you sure it's not too much trouble? Trust me, it's the only practical solution. This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. She gathered her purse and stepped out of the Mercedes, immediately wrapping her coat tighter against the brutal wind. Caleb guided her to his tow truck, opening the passenger door and helping her up into the cab. The contrast between her elegant appearance and the worn, utilitarian interior of his work truck was stark, but she settled in without complaint. "This is much better," she said, as the warm air from the heater enveloped them. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. Most people wouldn't have come out in weather like this." Caleb poured coffee from his thermos into the extra cup he kept in his glove compartment and handed it to her. "Most people don't run auto repair shops in small towns. We kind of have to be available for emergencies." Claire wrapped her hands around the warm cup and took a sip. "This is excellent coffee. Much better than I was expecting from..." She paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "From a guy who fixes cars for a living," Caleb supplied with a slight smile. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I didn't mean to sound condescending." "No, offense taken. You're probably not used to drinking coffee out of a thermos in a tow truck cab during a blizzard." Claire laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm and genuine. "No, I'm definitely not. Though I have to say, this is turning out to be far more pleasant than I expected when my car broke down." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the wind howl outside and watching the snow accumulate on the windshield. Caleb found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passenger, trying to figure out what someone like her was doing driving alone through rural highways during a blizzard. "Can I ask what brings you to this part of the world?" he said finally. "Highway 94 isn't exactly a main thoroughfare." Claire hesitated, and Caleb sensed that she was carefully considering her answer. "Business," she said finally. "I was driving back from a meeting in Riverside and thought I could make it home before the storm hit. Obviously, I miscalculated. Riverside's about 2 hours from here in good weather. That's a long drive for a business meeting." "Sometimes the important meetings happen in unexpected places," Claire replied, and something in her tone suggested that was all she was going to say on the subject. Caleb respected her privacy and turned his attention to preparing for the repair. He gathered the necessary tools and replacement hose from his supplies, explaining to Claire what he was going to do and approximately how long it would take. As he worked, she asked thoughtful questions about the repair process, displaying a genuine interest that surprised him. "You really know your way around engines," she observed, as he efficiently diagnosed and prepared to fix the problem. "I should hope so. I've been working on cars for most of my adult life." "Is that what you always wanted to do? Fix cars, I mean?" Caleb paused in his work, considering how to answer. "Not exactly. I used to be an automotive engineer, designing engine systems for new vehicles. Life took some unexpected turns, and now I fix whatever breaks down instead of building new things." Claire seemed to sense there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Instead, she said, "There's something to be said for fixing things that are broken. It's probably more immediately satisfying than designing something that might not be. Built for years. I hadn't thought of it that way," Caleb admitted, "but you might be right." As he finished installing the new radiator hose and refilled the cooling system, Caleb realized that despite the circumstances, he was actually enjoying Claire Cooper's company. She was intelligent, curious, and surprisingly easy to talk to. There was something about her that suggested depth and complexity beneath the polished exterior. "Try starting it now," he called as he closed the hood. The Mercedes engine turned over immediately, purring with the quiet confidence of German engineering. Claire rolled down her window, her face bright with relief and gratitude. "You're amazing," she said. "How much do I owe you?" Caleb wiped his hands on a shop rag and considered. The parts had cost him about $30, and the emergency service call would normally run $75. But something about the night, the storm, and Claire herself made him hesitate. "Let's call it $60, he said. Claire reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. In the dim light of the truck's interior, Caleb caught a glimpse of what looked like several credit cards and a substantial amount of cash. She handed him a $100 bill. "Keep the change," she said, "and thank you again. You literally saved my life tonight." As Claire prepared to drive away, carefully pulling back onto the treacherous highway, Caleb stood in the swirling snow and watched her taillights disappear into the storm. He had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, Claire Cooper would reappear in his life with an offer that would change everything he thought he knew about luck, opportunity, and the kinds of miracles that could happen to ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Caleb woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Sunlight was streaming through the thin curtains of his apartment above the garage, and for a moment he was disoriented by the brightness. After the previous night's blizzard, the sudden appearance of brilliant sunshine felt almost surreal. He squinted at his phone and saw 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, along with several text messages. The first was from Emmett, who had already left for school. "Dad, snow day got cancelled. Concert is still on tonight. Don't forget, love you. Forget, love you." Caleb smiled despite his exhaustion. The kid was nothing if not persistent about the important things. He made a mental note to close the garage early and make sure he was cleaned up and presentable for Emmett's solo performance. The second message was from an unknown local number. "Mr. Reese, this is Claire Cooper. Thank you again for last night. I hope I can return the favor someday." Caleb stared at the message for a moment, surprised that she'd taken the time to send it. Most customers, especially wealthy ones, considered payment to be sufficient thanks. The fact that Claire had gone out of her way to express additional gratitude said something about her character. He was about to put the phone down when it rang. Again, the caller ID showed a number with a 555 area code he didn't recognize. "Cedar Point Auto Repair," he answered, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Reese. My name is Daniel Morrison, and I'm calling on behalf of a client who was very impressed with your service last evening." Caleb sat up straighter. "Okay, how can I help you?" "Well, sir, my client would like to express her appreciation in a more substantial way. She's arranged for a small token of gratitude to be delivered to your business this morning. I wanted to call ahead to ensure someone would be available to receive it." "That's really not necessary," Caleb said, confused. "I was just doing my job." Nevertheless, my client was quite insistent. "The delivery should arrive sometime before noon. I trust that will be convenient?" After Caleb confirmed that he'd be at the garage, Daniel Morrison ended the call, leaving him staring at his phone with growing bewilderment. In 3 years of running Cedar Point Auto Repair, he'd never had a customer arrange for a delivery to thank him for service. Most people paid their bill and moved on with their lives. He showered quickly and headed downstairs to open the garage. The aftermath of the blizzard was evident everywhere. Snowdrifts 3 feet high against the building, cars buried under mounds of white powder, and the kind of crystal-clear blue sky that only appeared after major winter storms. Caleb spent the morning digging out the garage entrance and helping several customers whose cars wouldn't start in the sub-zero temperatures. By 11:30, he'd already made more money than he typically earned in a full day, thanks to dead batteries and frozen fuel lines throughout Millbrook. He was replacing the battery in old Pete Garrison's pickup truck when he heard the rumble of a large vehicle approaching. Caleb looked up to see a sleek black delivery truck pulling into his small parking lot. The vehicle was unmarked, except for elegant gold lettering that read, "Prestige Courier Services." A man in a crisp uniform climbed out of the truck and approached the garage with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Caleb Reese?" "That's me." "I have a delivery for you, sir. If you could just sign here." Caleb signed the electronic pad, wondering what kind of small token required a courier service that looked more expensive than most people's cars. The delivery man returned to his truck and began unloading something that made Caleb's jaw drop. It was a brand new snap-on toolbox, the kind that professional mechanics dreamed about but could rarely afford. The massive red cabinet on wheels probably cost more than Caleb's truck, and it was loaded with what appeared to be a complete set of professional-grade tools. "Wait," Caleb said as the delivery man began wheeling the toolbox toward the garage. "There has to be some mistake." The man consulted his clipboard. "Cedar Point Auto Repair, Caleb Reese, Highway 94 service call. That's you, right?" "Yeah, but this is way too much. I just fixed a radiator hose." The delivery man shrugged. "I just deliver what I'm told to deliver, sir. There's an envelope attached with a note from the sender." After the courier left, Caleb stood in his garage staring at the magnificent toolbox that now dominated the space. He found the envelope taped to the side and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Dear Caleb, thank you for your kindness last night. You didn't just fix my car, you restored my faith in human decency. I hope these tools will help you continue helping others the way you helped me. I also hope you'll allow me to take you to lunch this week to properly express my gratitude. Warmly, Claire Cooper PS. Please don't even think about returning this. Consider it payment for risking your life to help a stranger." Beneath the note was a business card with Claire's name and a phone number, along with what appeared to be a formal invitation printed on matching stationery. "You are cordially invited to lunch at the Riverside Club this Saturday at 1 p.m. Please call to confirm your attendance." Caleb read the note 3 times, each time becoming more confused and overwhelmed. The Riverside Club was the most exclusive restaurant in the entire region, the kind of place where reservations required weeks of advance notice, and dinner for 2 could cost more than most people's monthly car payment. He opened the drawers of the new toolbox and whistled softly. Every tool was top-of-the-line professional grade. Precision wrenches, digital multimeters, hydraulic lifts, diagnostic computers he'd only seen in high-end dealership service centers. The entire collection probably cost $15,000 or more. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself. Pete Garrison wandered over from his pickup truck, where he'd been waiting for the battery replacement to finish. "Sweet Jesus, Caleb, where did this come from?" "A customer," Caleb replied, still staring at the tools in disbelief. "What kind of customer gives away toolboxes like this? Did you save their life or something?" Caleb thought about Claire stranded on the highway in sub-zero temperatures during a blizzard. Maybe I did. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of customers commenting on the impressive new addition to his garage. But Caleb's mind kept returning to Claire Cooper and her extraordinary gesture. He'd met wealthy customers before, but none who'd shown this level of appreciation for basic automotive service. More importantly, none who'd made him feel the way Claire had during their conversation in his truck cab. There had been something about her, an intelligence, a warmth, a genuine interest in him as a person rather than just a service provider, that had stayed with him long after she'd driven away. as he locked up Mrs. Patterson's Toyota and prepared. To close early for Emmett's concert, Caleb realized that Claire Cooper had managed to accomplish something remarkable. For the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to something that wasn't directly related to keeping his business afloat or taking care of his son. He was looking forward to seeing her again. But as he changed into his best shirt and headed to Millbrook Elementary School, Caleb had no idea that Claire Cooper wasn't just a wealthy woman with a generous spirit. She was someone whose gratitude came with the power to change his entire life, and whose true identity would soon challenge everything he thought he knew about luck, opportunity, and the kinds of miracles that could happen when ordinary people encountered extraordinary circumstances. The question was whether he was ready for that kind of change, and whether a man who'd built his life around fixing broken things could handle having his own life completely transformed. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape around Millbrook look like something from a postcard. Caleb stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time and wondering if he'd lost his mind. He was wearing his only good suit, a charcoal grey ensemble he'd bought for Rachel's funeral and hadn't touched since. And trying to convince himself that having lunch with Claire Cooper was just a normal expression of gratitude between a customer and a service provider. The problem was, nothing about Claire Cooper felt normal. Emmett knocked on the bathroom door. "Dad, you look nervous. Are you going on a date?" "It's not a date," Caleb replied quickly. "It's a business lunch with the lady who gave you the awesome toolbox." "That's right." Emmett was quiet for a moment. "Mom always said that when people do really nice things for you, it usually means they want something or they're just really good people. Which one do you think she is?" Caleb paused in his tie adjusting. Even at 11 years old, Emmett had inherited Rachel's sharp intuition about people. "I honestly don't know, buddy. I guess I'm about to find out." The drive to the Riverside Club took 45 minutes through winding country roads that gradually transformed from rural farmland to manicured estates. Caleb had driven past the club's entrance many times over the years, but had never had reason to turn into the long, tree-lined driveway that led to the main building. The clubhouse was an imposing structure of red brick and white columns that looked like it had been transplanted from a southern plantation. Luxury vehicles filled the circular driveway: Mercedes, BMWs, a few Bentleys, and cars so expensive Caleb couldn't even identify the manufacturers. His 15-year-old pickup truck looked like a relic from another century. A valet in a crisp uniform approached as Caleb climbed out of his truck. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you here for lunch?" "I'm meeting Claire Cooper," Caleb said, feeling completely out of place. The valet's demeanor immediately shifted to something approaching reverence. "Of course, sir. Ms. Cooper is waiting for you in the Madison room. If you'll follow me. As they walked through the club's ornate lobby, Caleb noticed the subtle details that screamed old money and exclusivity. The furniture looked like genuine antiques. The paintings on the walls were originals rather than prints, and every surface gleamed with the kind of polish that could only be maintained by a small army of staff. The Madison room turned out to be a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a snow-covered golf course. Claire was standing near the windows when Caleb entered, and he had to pause for a moment to process what he was seeing. This wasn't the elegantly dressed but slightly disheveled woman he'd met on Highway 94. This Claire Cooper looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. She wore a tailored navy dress that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and her jewelry, while understated, clearly belonged in the same category as the cars in the parking lot. "Caleb," she said, turning with a warm smile, "thank you so much for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "To be honest, I wasn't sure I would either, Caleb admitted. This is a little outside my usual lunch destinations. Claire laughed, and the sound was exactly as he remembered, genuine and unpretentious, despite her obviously expensive surroundings. I hope you don't mind. I thought it would be nice to have some privacy for our conversation. They settled at a table that had been set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum. A server appeared immediately, offering wine selections that Caleb had never heard of. He stuck with water. Claire ordered a glass of something that the server clearly considered an excellent choice. The toolbox was incredibly generous, Caleb said once they'd placed their lunch orders. But it was way too much. I just did my job. Claire shook her head. You did much more than your job. You risked your life driving through a blizzard to help a complete stranger. Most people would have told me to call a tow truck in the morning. Most people don't run auto repair shops in small towns. Emergency calls are part of the business. Is that really what you think? Claire studied his face carefully. That what you did was just business? Caleb considered the question. I guess not entirely. When I heard the panic in your voice, I couldn't just leave you stranded out there. My wife always said that helping people when they really need it is what separates good people from everyone else. Something flickered in Claire's expression. Interest, maybe even approval. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Rachel died 3 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm making decisions. I'm sorry for your loss. Claire's sympathy sounded genuine. It must be incredibly difficult raising your son alone while running a business. Some days are harder than others, but Emmett's a good kid and we're managing. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their meals. Caleb had ordered something called the club sandwich, which turned out to be unlike any sandwich he'd ever encountered, while Claire had selected a salad that looked more like a work of art than food. Can I ask you something? Caleb said as they began eating. What kind of business meeting were you driving back from the other night? It seemed like an awfully long trip for whatever it was. Claire paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, and Caleb got the distinct impression that she was carefully considering her answer. Real estate, she said finally. I was looking at some properties in the Riverside area. Are you thinking about moving to the area? Something like that. Claire set down her fork and leaned forward slightly. Actually, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about today. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes, he thought. The catch. The reason for the expensive toolbox and the private dining room at an exclusive club. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, Claire continued, about how you used to be an automotive engineer before life took some unexpected turns. What about it? I have a proposition for you, a business opportunity that I think might interest you. Caleb set down his sandwich, his appetite suddenly gone. What kind of opportunity? Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a leather portfolio. I'm involved in developing a new automotive service center concept. High-end facilities that combine traditional repair services with advanced diagnostic technology. The kind of place where customers feel comfortable leaving their luxury vehicles. She opened the portfolio and showed him architectural drawings, business plans, and financial projections. We're looking for someone to manage the technical operations, someone with both engineering expertise and hands-on repair experience. Caleb stared at the documents, trying to process what he was seeing. The plans showed a facility that was larger and more sophisticated than anything he'd ever imagined working in. The salary figures made his head spin. Why me? He asked. You could hire any number of people with better credentials, because credentials don't tell you whether someone will drive through a blizzard to help a stranger, Claire replied. Character does, and Thursday night you showed me more character in 2 hours than most people display in a lifetime. Caleb looked around the private dining room at the expensive meal he'd barely touched, at the woman across from him who was offering him what appeared to be a dream job based on a single act of roadside assistance. "This feels too good to be true," he said finally. Claire smiled. "The best opportunities usually do. The question is whether you're willing to take a chance on something that could change your life." As Caleb stared at the business plans spread across their table, he realized that Claire Cooper had just presented him with a choice that would define not just his future, but Emmett's as well. The question was whether he had the courage to step into a world he'd never imagined he could belong to, or whether fear would keep him trapped in the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice that sounded remarkably like Rachel was telling him that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most extraordinary rewards. Caleb drove home from the Riverside Club in a daze, Claire's business portfolio sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking time bomb. She'd given him the weekend to consider her offer, but the salary figures alone were enough to make his head spin. The proposed position would pay more in 1 year than he'd made in the last 3 years combined, and that didn't include the benefits package or the equity stake she'd mentioned almost as an afterthought. But something nagged at him. The scope of the project, the level of investment implied by the architectural drawings, the casual way Claire had mentioned multiple locations, it all suggested resources that went far beyond what a successful real estate investor should reasonably possess. After putting Emmett to bed, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and decided to do what he should have done days ago: find out exactly who Claire Cooper was. His first Google search for Claire Cooper real estate returned thousands of results, most of them for different people entirely. He tried adding Riverside to narrow the search, then automotive, then business development. Still nothing that seemed to match the woman he'd met. Growing frustrated, Caleb remembered the business card Claire had given him and typed in the phone number. That search led him to a company called Meridian Development Partners, which claimed to specialize in strategic property acquisition and commercial development. The website was professionally designed but surprisingly sparse on details, offering mostly generic language about innovative solutions and transformative projects. Claire's name appeared nowhere on the site. Caleb was about to give up when he remembered something else: the courier service that had delivered the toolbox. Prestige Courier Services. He searched for that company and found a website that catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals and corporate clients requiring discretionary delivery services. Discretionary delivery services. That was an interesting way to describe dropping off a $15,000 toolbox. On impulse, Caleb decided to search for information about the Riverside Club itself. Surely a place that exclusive would have some kind of online presence, maybe a membership directory or news coverage of events. What he found made him set down his coffee cup and stare at his laptop screen. The Riverside Club wasn't just exclusive, it was legendary. Founded in 1892, it was one of the oldest and most prestigious private clubs in the region, with a membership list that read like a who's who of American wealth and influence. The waiting list for membership reportedly stretched for decades, and the initiation fee alone was rumored to be in the six-figure range. More importantly, the club didn't allow just anyone to reserve private dining rooms. According to an article in a luxury lifestyle magazine, access to the Madison Room, where he'd had lunch with Claire, was restricted to a small group of the club's most influential members. People who sat on corporate boards, owned major companies, or had donated significant amounts to the club's foundation. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. Claire hadn't just taken him to lunch at an expensive restaurant. She'd taken him to a place where his very presence suggested she wielded serious influence. He tried a different approach, searching for news about recent real estate deals in the Riverside area. If Claire was involved in significant property acquisitions. There might be public records or business journal coverage. That's when he found it. Buried in the business section of the Riverside Daily Tribune was a small article dated 3 weeks earlier. Mystery buyer acquires historic Thornfield estate for undisclosed sum. The article mentioned that the 47-acre property, which included a mansion built in 1898 and several outbuildings, had been purchased through a shell company called Cooper Holdings, LLC. Cooper Holdings. Caleb's pulse quickened as he searched for more information about the company. What he discovered over the next 2 hours of increasingly frantic research painted a picture that left him questioning everything he thought he knew about his lunch. Companion Cooper Holdings wasn't just any investment company. It was part of a complex web of corporations that seemed to be involved in everything, from luxury real estate development to commercial property management to high-end automotive dealerships. The more Caleb dug, the more he realized he was looking at the tip of an enormous iceberg. Cross-referencing property records, business filings, and news articles, he began to piece together a pattern. Over the past 5 years, companies with names like Cooper Development, Cooper Industries, and Cooper Commercial Properties had been quietly acquiring prime real estate throughout the region. Not small-scale investments, but major commercial properties, historic estates, and entire city blocks. The amounts involved were staggering. Individual transactions in the tens of millions, portfolio values that reached into the hundreds of millions. And at the center of it all, the name Cooper appeared again and again. But Claire Cooper herself remained a ghost. No business magazine, profiles, no society page mentions, no interviews or public appearances. For someone apparently controlling a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, she maintained an almost supernatural level of privacy. Caleb's hands were shaking as he typed one final search: Cooper Real Estate Empire Billion. The first result made his stomach drop. It was an article from Forbes magazine, published just 6 months earlier. The Invisible Billionaire: How Claire Cooper Built a Real Estate Empire While Staying Completely Out of the Spotlight. Caleb clicked on the article with trembling fingers and read the opening paragraph. At 32, Claire Cooper controls one of the largest privately held real estate portfolios in North America, with holdings estimated to exceed $3.2 billion. Yet despite her massive influence on commercial and residential markets from coast to coast, Cooper has managed to remain almost completely unknown to the general public. Industry insiders call her the ghost of real estate, a woman who can reshape entire city skylines while maintaining complete anonymity. The article went on to describe Claire's background: the daughter of a construction worker who had built her empire from a single apartment building purchased with a loan from her grandmother. It detailed her sophisticated approach to acquisitions, her reputation for fair dealing with existing tenants, and her unusual practice of personally visiting properties before making purchase decisions. Cooper is known for her hands-on approach, the article continued. Unlike many real estate moguls who operate from boardrooms, Cooper frequently drives herself to potential acquisitions, often traveling hundreds of miles to personally inspect properties that have caught her interest. Caleb set his laptop aside and walked to his kitchen window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape of Millbrook. The woman he'd helped fix a radiator hose on Highway 94 wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the most powerful people in the region. Someone who could buy and sell entire towns on a whim, and she'd offered him a job. Not just any job, but what now appeared to be a management position in what was probably a multi-million-dollar development project. The automotive service center she'd described wasn't a small business opportunity. It was likely part of a major commercial complex that would reshape whatever community it was built in. Caleb thought about the way Claire had looked at him across the table at the Riverside Club, The genuine interest in her eyes when she'd asked about his background, the warmth in her voice when she'd mentioned character being more important than credentials. He thought about Emmett, asleep upstairs, and the opportunities this could create for his son. College funds, financial security, a future that stretched far beyond the limitations of small-town auto repair. He thought about Rachel and what she would have said about a billionaire who drove herself through blizzards to inspect properties, who stopped to thank a mechanic for roadside assistance, who offered life-changing opportunities to people based on character rather than connections. But mostly, he thought about the fact that in less than 24 hours, he needed to give Claire Cooper an answer that would determine the entire future of his family. And for the first time since Rachel's death, Caleb Reese was terrified not of failing, but of succeeding beyond his wildest dreams. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of grey, overcast sky that matched Caleb's mood perfectly. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning as his mind raced between the incredible opportunity Claire had offered and the overwhelming reality of who she actually was. By dawn, he'd made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to call Claire and accept her offer. But first, he needed to do something that scared him almost as much as the prospect of working for a billionaire. He needed to tell Emmett that their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. He found his son in the kitchen, methodically working his way through a bowl of cereal while reading a book about automotive engineering that Caleb had bought him for Christmas. "Hey, buddy," Caleb said, pouring himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "We need to talk about something important." Emmett looked up, immediately alert to the serious tone in his father's voice. "Are we in trouble? Is it about money again?" The question hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. At 11 years old, his son had already learned to associate serious conversations with financial crises. "No, it's actually the opposite. Remember the lady I had lunch with yesterday? The one who gave me the toolbox? The rich lady?" "Yeah, the rich lady. Turns out she's a lot richer than I thought, and she's offered me a job. A really good job that would mean we'd have to move away from Millbrook." Emmett set down his spoon, his expression becoming thoughtful in the way that reminded Caleb so much of Rachel. "How far away?" "I'm not sure yet. But it would mean leaving the garage. Leaving your school, starting over somewhere new. Would we have more money?" Caleb almost laughed at the understatement. "We'd have enough money that you could go to any college you wanted without me having to worry about how to pay for it." Emmett was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of someone far older than his years. "Dad, do you want to take the job?" "I think I do. But I want to know how you feel about it first. Mom always said that when something seems too good to be true, you should look for the catch. But she also said that sometimes good things happen to good people." Emmett paused, then looked directly at his father. "You're a good person, Dad. Maybe it's just your turn for something good to happen." An hour later, Caleb called the number on Claire's business card, his heart hammering as he waited for her to answer. "Caleb?" Claire's voice was warm with what sounded like genuine pleasure. "I was hoping you'd call. Have you had a chance to think about my offer?" "I have, and I'd like to accept, but I have some questions." "Of course. Would you prefer to discuss them over the phone, or would you like to meet in person?" Caleb hesitated. Part of him wanted to handle everything over the phone, to maintain some distance from the overwhelming reality of Claire's world. But another part, the part that had driven through a blizzard to help a stranger, wanted to look her in the eye. When he committed to this leap of faith, in person, if that's possible. "Perfect. Are you free this afternoon? I'd like to show you the actual site where we're planning to build the facility." 3 hours later, Caleb found himself driving through an industrial area on the outskirts of Riverside, following GPS directions that Claire had texted him. The location seemed oddly remote for what she'd described as a high-end automotive service center, but as he turned into a large, empty lot, He began to understand the scope of what she had in mind. Claire was waiting for him beside a black Range Rover, dressed more casually than he'd seen her before. Jeans, boots, and a wool coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but looked practical enough for walking around a construction site. "Thank you for coming," she said, as he climbed out of his truck. "I wanted you to see this before you made your final decision." "It's a big lot," Caleb said, looking around at the 40 or 50 acres of empty land. 68 acres, actually, and the automotive center is just the beginning. Claire pulled out what looked like an architect's tablet and showed him a detailed site plan. "We're planning an entire automotive campus. The service center you'd manage, a performance driving school, a classic car restoration facility, and a luxury car dealership specializing in high-end electric and hybrid vehicles." Caleb stared at the plans, trying to process the scale of what she was describing. "This would cost about $200 million to build completely," Claire finished. "We're planning to do it in phases over 5 years." "Jesus," Caleb whispered. Claire smiled. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to understand what you'd be stepping into. This isn't just about managing one facility. You'd be helping to create something that could revolutionize how people think about automotive service in this region." They walked across the empty lot, Claire pointing out where different buildings would be located, explaining her vision for integrating traditional repair services with cutting-edge diagnostic technology. As she talked, Caleb found himself caught up in her enthusiasm, beginning to see not just the massive scale of the project, but its genuine potential to change an entire industry. The restoration facility would be particularly interesting for someone with your background, Claire said, as they stood where the main service center would be built. "We're planning to offer services for everything from classic muscle cars to modern supercars. The kind of work that requires both engineering, knowledge, and hands-on craftsmanship." "Why me, though?" Caleb asked, the question that had been haunting him since their lunch. "You could hire anyone for this. Someone with experience managing large facilities, someone with connections in the industry." Claire was quiet for a moment, looking out across the empty land. "Do you know why I was driving through that storm on Thursday night? You said you were coming back from looking at properties." "I was. Specifically, I was looking at a small auto repair shop in Riverside whose owner wanted to retire. I'd heard good things about the quality of their work, and I was considering acquiring it as a starting point for this project." Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What changed your mind?" "You did." Claire turned to face him directly. "I spent 2 hours with that shop owner, and all he talked about was profit margins and retirement plans. He didn't mention loving cars once, didn't show any real passion for the work itself." She gestured toward the empty lot around them. "I'm not just building a business, Caleb. I'm trying to create something that honors what automotive work can be at its best. The kind of place where people bring their most treasured possessions because they trust the craftsmanship and care they'll receive." "And you think I can provide that?" "I know you can. I saw it in how you talked about your work, in the condition of your tools, in the way you approached fixing my car. But mostly, I saw it in the fact that you were willing to risk your life to help a complete stranger." Claire pulled out an envelope from her coat pocket. "I've prepared a formal offer letter with all the details we discussed, plus some additional benefits I didn't mention yesterday. But before you look at it, I want you to understand something." She paused, meeting his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of their conversation in his truck cab during the blizzard. "This job will change your life completely. The salary, the responsibilities, the opportunities, everything will be different. But it will also be demanding in ways you've never experienced. You'll be managing a multi-million-dollar operation, overseeing dozens of employees, dealing with customers who expect perfection because they're paying premium prices for it." Caleb took the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands. "Are you trying to talk me out of it?" Claire smiled. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're saying yes to, because once you commit to this, there's no going back to your old life. Not really. As Caleb opened the envelope and saw the formal terms of an offer that would guarantee financial security for him and Emmett for the rest of their lives, he realized that Claire Cooper had just given him the most valuable gift anyone had ever offered him: complete honesty about the magnitude of the choice he was making. The question now was whether he had the courage to step fully into the unknown, leaving behind everything familiar and safe for the promise of something extraordinary. Tuesday. Morning brought news that would shake the entire region and thrust Caleb into a spotlight he'd never imagined. He was in his garage, working on what he'd decided would be one of his final repair jobs before transitioning to Claire's project, when Tom Mitchell burst through the door holding a copy of the Riverside Business Journal. "Caleb, you need to see this," Tom said, his voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "Front page, buddy, front page." Caleb wiped his hands on a shop rag and took the newspaper. The headline made his knees go weak. "Mystery billionaire announces massive automotive complex. Local mechanic tapped to lead $200 million development." Below the headline was a professional photograph of Claire that Caleb had never seen before. She looked polished, powerful, and completely comfortable in what was obviously a corporate boardroom setting. Next to it was a smaller photo that made his stomach drop. It was him, standing next to his tow truck, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. "When were you going to tell me you're working for Claire freaking Cooper?" Tom demanded. "Do you have any idea who she is?" Caleb sank into the plastic chair he kept for customers, still staring at the newspaper. "I'm starting to figure that out." The article was comprehensive and obviously well-researched. It detailed Claire's background, her real estate empire, and, most importantly, the specifics of the Riverside Automotive Campus project that she'd officially announced to the press the day before. The facility would employ over 300 people when fully operational, include a state-of-the-art training center for automotive technicians, and feature the most advanced diagnostic equipment available anywhere in the region. But it was the quotes from Claire herself that made Caleb's chest tighten with a mixture of pride and terror. "We conducted an extensive search for someone to lead the technical operations of this facility," Cooper told the Business Journal. "We weren't looking for just another corporate manager. We were looking for someone who understood that automotive service, at its best, is about craftsmanship, integrity, and genuine care for both the vehicles and the customers who trust us with them." The article went on to describe how Claire had discovered Caleb during what it termed a chance encounter, praising his technical expertise and commitment to excellence. It mentioned his engineering background at Titan Automotive and his current operation of Cedar Point Auto Repair, painting him as a local success story who represented exactly the kind of hands-on expertise the new facility would showcase. "The phone's been ringing all morning," Tom continued. "Channel 8 wants to interview you, the Herald wants a follow-up story, and I've already had 3 people ask me if you can get them jobs at the new place." Caleb's phone buzzed with yet another call from a number he didn't recognize. He'd stopped, answering after the 5th reporter had called, asking for comment on his meteoric rise from small-town mechanic to automotive executive. "I need some air," Caleb said, walking outside where a small crowd had gathered across the street. Mrs. Patterson was pointing at his garage and explaining something to her neighbor. Pete Garrison was standing by his pickup truck, grinning and giving Caleb a thumbs up. That's when Caleb noticed the black sedan parked at the far end of the block, its occupants watching his garage through what looked like professional camera equipment. As he stood there, trying to process the surreal nature of his situation, another vehicle pulled up, a white van with Channel 8 News logos on the side. His phone rang again. This time, it was Claire. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. I wanted to give you more time to adjust before making this public, but some information leaked to the press yesterday afternoon. Are you okay? Define okay, Caleb replied, watching as a reporter and cameraman climbed out of the news van. I've got news crews outside my garage and half the town acting like I just won the lottery. I'm sending someone to help you manage. This, Daniel Morrison. You spoke with him about the toolbox delivery. He handles media relations for my companies. Claire, I haven't even officially accepted your offer yet. There was a pause. Haven't you? Caleb realized she was right. From the moment he'd seen the scope of her vision, from their conversation at the construction site, he'd known he was going to say yes. The formal paperwork was just a technicality. I guess I have, he admitted. Good, because we need to move. Quickly now. The announcement has generated more interest than I expected, and we're getting inquiries from automotive manufacturers, industry publications, and potential commercial partners. This is becoming bigger than either of us anticipated. The reporter from Channel 8 was walking toward the garage, followed by her cameraman. Caleb ducked back inside, but he could see through the window that she was setting up for what looked like a live broadcast. How much bigger, he asked. The governor's office called this morning. They want to attend the groundbreaking ceremony. Ford and Tesla have both reached out about potential partnerships. And the automotive trade magazines are calling this the most significant development in regional automotive services in decades. Caleb sat down heavily in his chair, trying to absorb what Claire was telling him. I fix radiator hoses and replace brake pads. How did I end up in the middle of all this? Because you're good at what you do, and you care about doing it right. That's rarer than you think, especially at the scale we're talking about. Through the window, Caleb could see that the crowd across the street had grown. Someone had apparently called the local newspaper as well, because he recognized Janet Morrison, the bank gossip, being interviewed by what looked like a reporter. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Is this really about my qualifications? Or am I just a good story? The small-town mechanic who gets discovered by a billionaire. The silence stretched, long enough to make Caleb wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, Claire spoke, and her voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. 3 months ago, I could have announced this project with any number of industry veterans as the technical director. People with impressive resumes and corporate connections. The story would have been about the facility itself, maybe a brief mention in the business pages. She paused. But that's not the story I wanted to tell. I wanted to show that expertise and character can be found in unexpected places, that the best solutions sometimes come from people who've never had the opportunity to prove what they're capable of. So I am the story. No, Caleb. You're the proof that the story is true. As Caleb watched Daniel Morrison's Lincoln Town car pull up to his garage, followed immediately by a second news van, he realized that his quiet life in Millbrook was officially over. Whatever came next, he would be doing it under the scrutiny of an industry, a region, and a media that would be watching to see if a small-town mechanic could really step into the role Claire Cooper believed he was meant for. The question was no longer whether he could handle the job, it was whether he could handle the pressure of becoming the symbol of everything Claire was trying to prove about talent, opportunity, and the courage to bet on people that others might overlook. And somewhere in the chaos of ringing phones, gathering crowds, and approaching reporters, Caleb realized that for the first time in years, he was genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring. 2 weeks after the media explosion, Caleb found himself standing in the conference room of Cooper Holdings' downtown headquarters, surrounded by more wealth and power than he'd ever imagined being in the same room with. The mahogany table was longer than his entire garage, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city that made him feel like he was floating above the world he'd known his entire life. Claire sat at the head of the table, every inch the billionaire executive in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But when she caught his eye and smiled, Caleb saw the same warmth that had sustained their conversation during the blizzard 2 weeks ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire began, addressing the dozen people seated around the table, "I'd like you to meet Caleb Reese, who will be serving as our Director of Technical Operations for the Riverside Automotive Campus." The introductions that followed were a blur of impressive titles and corporate affiliations. There was Michael Harrison, Senior Vice President of Engineering at Ford Motor Company; Sarah Chen, Director of Innovation at Tesla's Service Division; Robert Martinez, CEO of Advanced Automotive Systems. Each person around the table represented millions of dollars in potential partnerships and contracts. "Mr. Reese," Michael Harrison said, leaning forward with obvious interest, "Claire has told us remarkable things about your vision for integrating traditional craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. I'm curious about your thoughts on the future of automotive service in an increasingly electric vehicle market." Caleb felt every eye in the room turn to him. 3 weeks ago, the most important decision he'd made was whether to stay open during a blizzard. Now he was being asked to share his vision with executives who shaped the automotive industry on a global scale. "Well," Caleb began, finding his voice, "I think the fundamental challenge isn't really about the technology itself. It's about trust. Whether someone drives a 1967 Mustang or a 2024 Tesla, they're trusting us with something valuable to them. The technology changes, but the need for expertise, honesty, and genuine care doesn't." Sarah Chen nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to see more of in this industry. Too often, service centers focus on efficiency over relationship building. But how do you scale that philosophy?" asked Robert Martinez. "Personal attention works great in a small shop, but when you're talking about a facility that will service hundreds of vehicles per week." Caleb thought about Mrs. Patterson and her ancient Toyota, about Pete Garrison trusting him with his livelihood, about every customer who'd walked into Cedar Point Auto Repair, hoping their problem could be solved with honesty and skill. "You hire people who understand that every car tells a story," he said. "That the person dropping off a 20-year-old Honda is probably stretching their budget just to keep it running, while someone bringing in a brand new Porsche has different expectations, but the same fundamental need for trustworthy service." Claire had been quiet during this exchange, but now she leaned forward. "That's exactly why we're designing the facility the way we are. Caleb, why don't you walk them through the operational philosophy?" For the next 30 minutes, Caleb found himself explaining concepts he'd never articulated before, but had been practicing for years. He talked about diagnostic protocols that combined computer analysis with hands-on inspection, about training programs that would teach technicians not just how to fix problems, but how to communicate with customers about what those problems meant for their lives. "The restoration division will be particularly interesting," Caleb explained, warming to his subject. "We're planning to create apprenticeship programs that pair experienced craftsmen with newer technicians. The idea is to preserve traditional skills while integrating modern tools and techniques." Michael Harrison was taking notes. "Ford has been struggling with exactly this issue, maintaining service quality as vehicles become more technologically and complex. What you're describing could become a model for the entire industry." "That's the goal," Claire said. "We're not just building a service center. We're trying to demonstrate that automotive service can be elevated to an art form without losing its practical purpose." The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions about everything from staff training protocols to customer experience design. Caleb found himself not just participating but leading conversations about topics he'd never considered from a business perspective. When the meeting finally ended, Claire walked him to her private office while the executives continued their discussions in the conference room. "How do you feel?" she asked as they settled into leather chairs that faced the city skyline. "Like I just drank from a fire hose," Caleb admitted, "but also like I actually knew what I was talking about, which was unexpected." Claire laughed. "You more than knew what you were talking about. You articulated a vision that none of those executives have heard before, despite their decades of experience. It didn't feel revolutionary. It felt like common sense. That's exactly why it was revolutionary. Common sense is remarkably uncommon in corporate America." Claire pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the coffee table between them. "Which brings me to the real reason I wanted to meet with you privately today." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. "There's more? Much more. The partnerships we discussed today, Ford, Tesla, Advanced Automotive, they're all interested in using our facility as a pilot program for new service methodologies. If successful, they want to license our operational model for implementation at service centers nationwide." She opened the folder, revealing contracts, financial projections, and licensing agreements that made the original job offer look modest by comparison. "We're talking about royalties that could reach 8 figures annually within 5 years. Your base salary would increase proportionally, along with equity stakes that could make you independently wealthy." Caleb stared at the documents, trying to process numbers that seemed to exist in a different universe from anything he'd ever imagined. "But that's not the biggest opportunity," Claire continued. "The Department of Transportation has been watching our development closely. They're interested in our training programs as a potential solution to the national shortage of skilled automotive technicians." She pulled out another set of documents. "They want to fund expansion of our apprenticeship model to 50 locations across the country. Federal grants, state partnerships, integration with community college systems." "You're talking about changing an entire industry," Caleb said quietly. "I'm talking about you changing an entire industry. This started with your vision, your expertise, your understanding of what automotive service should be." Caleb stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city spread out below. Somewhere down there was Cedar Point Auto Repair, probably locked up and empty now that he'd temporarily closed it to focus on the new project. Somewhere else was the apartment where Emmett was probably doing homework, excited about their upcoming move to a house Claire had helped them find in Riverside. "Claire, 3 weeks ago I was wondering if I could afford to keep my shop open another month. Now you're telling me I could be running a national network of automotive facilities?" "I'm telling you that the expertise you developed fixing radiator hoses and replacing brake pads is exactly what this industry needs to reconnect with its customers. The scale is different, but the principles are the same." Caleb turned back to face her. "And you're willing to bet everything on a guy who's never managed more than one employee at a time? Claire stood and walked over to join him at the window. "I'm betting on the same person who drove through a blizzard to help a stranger, someone who puts character ahead of convenience, quality ahead of profit margins." She paused, looking out at the city with him. "But I need you to understand what accepting this level of opportunity means. You'll be traveling constantly, speaking at industry conferences, testifying before government committees. Your life will become public in ways you can't imagine. And Emmett will grow up understanding that his father changed an industry and improved millions of people's lives. Is that something you can live with?" As Caleb looked out at the city that would soon be home to the most advanced automotive facility in the country, he realized that Claire Cooper wasn't just offering him a job or even a career. She was offering him the chance to prove that ordinary people with extraordinary character could reshape the world around them. The question was whether he was ready to become the person she believed he already was. 3 days after the industry meeting, Caleb was reviewing architectural plans in his temporary office at Cooper Holdings when Daniel Morrison knocked on his door, his usually composed expression tight with concern. "We have a problem," Daniel said, closing the door behind him and setting a tablet on Caleb's desk. A significant one. The tablet displayed an article from Auto Industry Weekly with a headline that made Caleb's blood run cold. "Cooper's Folly, Billionaire's Pet Project, Built on Questionable Foundation." "Who wrote this?" Caleb asked, scrolling through the article's damaging accusations about his qualifications, the project's viability, and Claire's judgment. "Marcus Kellerman," Daniel replied grimly. "CEO of Kellerman Automotive Group. They're the largest automotive service chain in the region, and they've been systematically acquiring independent shops for the past 5 years." Caleb continued reading, his anger building with each paragraph. The article questioned his engineering credentials, suggested that Claire's investment was motivated by personal rather than business considerations, and implied that the entire project was a publicity stunt designed to mask poor financial performance in Claire's other ventures. "This is all lies," Caleb said, looking up from the tablet. "Of course it is. But Kellerman has resources and influence, and he's been planning this attack carefully. Look at this." Daniel pulled up another screen showing a series of social media posts, blog articles, and industry forum discussions, all echoing similar themes about Claire's poor judgment and Caleb's lack of qualifications. "He's been building a narrative for weeks," Daniel continued. "Ever since the project was announced, his people have been planting seeds of doubt throughout the industry. Why? What does he gain from destroying this project?" Daniel pulled up a map on the tablet. "Kellerman owns 16 service centers within a 50-mile radius of our planned facility. He's been working to acquire or drive out every independent shop in the region. Our project represents everything he's been trying to eliminate. Small-scale, relationship-based service that prioritizes quality over volume." The office door opened, and Claire entered, her expression darker than Caleb had ever seen it. "I assume Daniel has filled you in on Kellerman's campaign," she said, taking a seat across from Caleb's desk. "Just the basics. How bad is it?" Claire exchanged a look with Daniel. "Ford called this morning. They're re-evaluating their partnership commitment, pending resolution of the questions being raised about project leadership." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "Tesla? Still committed, but they want additional documentation about your background and qualifications." "And the federal funding?" Daniel answered this time. "The Department of Transportation is conducting what they're calling a due diligence review of all project personnel before finalizing their commitment." Caleb pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. "So Kellerman writes a hit piece, and suddenly everyone's questioning whether I'm qualified for a job I've been doing my entire adult life?" "It's not about your qualifications," Claire said firmly. "It's about perception and politics. Kellerman has relationships throughout the industry. He sits on the board of the Automotive Service Association. He's donated heavily to political campaigns, and he's built a network of allies who owe him favors." "What kind of favors?" Daniel pulled up another file. "Kellerman Automotive Group has acquired 43 independent shops in the past 3 years. In most cases, they started by spreading rumors about financial difficulties, quality problems, or regulatory violations. Then they offered to rescue struggling owners by purchasing their businesses at below-market prices. That's what he's trying to do to us?" "It's what he's trying to do to me," Claire corrected. "You're just collateral damage. Kellerman has been targeting my real estate acquisitions for months, trying to position himself as the buyer whenever I'm forced to sell properties." Caleb stared at her. "You think he's trying to force you to sell the entire automotive campus project?" "I think he's trying to destroy my credibility so completely that I have no choice but to abandon the project or sell it to him at a fraction of its development cost." Claire stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Marcus," Kellerman built his empire by convincing people that independent automotive service was obsolete, that only large corporate chains could provide reliable, efficient service. Our project threatens that entire narrative. So what do we do? Daniel and Claire exchanged another look before Claire returned to her seat. We fight back, she said simply. But I need you to understand what that means. Kellerman isn't going to stop with industry articles and social media campaigns. He's going to attack you personally, professionally, and probably legally. What do you mean, legally? I mean, he's probably already investigating your past, looking for anything he can use against you. Unpaid taxes, traffic violations, professional disputes, anything that can be spun into a narrative about poor judgment or questionable character. Caleb thought about his spotless record, his careful attention to regulations and licensing requirements, his methodical approach to customer relations. He won't find anything. He doesn't need to find anything real, Daniel said. He just needs to create enough smoke to make people assume there's fire. A few anonymous complaints to regulatory agencies, some strategic leaks to trade publications, maybe a frivolous lawsuit designed to generate negative publicity. Claire leaned forward. Caleb, I need you to know that I will do everything in my power to protect you and this project. But I also need you to understand that accepting this position means accepting that you'll be under attack from people with virtually unlimited resources and no ethical constraints. Are you asking me to walk away? I'm asking you to make sure you want to stay. Because once we start fighting back against Kellerman, there's no neutral ground. You'll either be part of the solution or you'll become a liability that we can't afford to protect. Caleb stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where ordinary people were going about their daily lives, unaware of the corporate warfare being waged in the skyscrapers above them. Claire, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why is this project so important to you? You could build a dozen other developments that would be just as profitable without any of this controversy. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Because my father spent 40 years working in shops like yours, watching corporate chains move into his town and drive out every independent mechanic who cared more about quality than profit margins. By the time he retired, there wasn't a single locally owned automotive business left. She paused, her voice taking on an intensity that Caleb had never heard before. Marcus Kellerman represents everything that's wrong with this industry. The idea that bigger is always better, that efficiency matters more than craftsmanship, that customers are just revenue streams to be optimized rather than people with real problems that need real solutions. Claire stood and joined Caleb at the window. This project isn't just about building a better service center. It's about proving that there's still room in this industry for people who believe that how you do something matters as much as how much money you make doing it. Caleb thought about his conversation with Emmett, about Rachel's voice, reminding him that good things happen to good people, about the choice between staying safe and stepping into the unknown. What do you need me to do? Claire smiled for the first time since entering his office. Help me show Marcus Kellerman that he picked the wrong fight with the wrong people. As Caleb looked out at the city that would soon be home to either the most innovative automotive facility in the country or the most expensive failure in Claire Cooper's career, he realized that the real test wasn't whether he could manage a complex business operation. The real test was whether he had the courage to stand up to someone who had built an empire by convincing people that they didn't deserve better than what he was willing to give them. The crisis hit exactly 1 week later, on a Thursday morning that started like any other, but would end with everything Caleb had worked for hanging by a thread. He was in his office reviewing training curriculum proposals when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Emmett's school, and Caleb felt his stomach tighten. School calls during the day usually meant trouble. Mr. Reese, this is Principal Davidson at Riverside Elementary. I'm afraid we need you to come in immediately. There's been an incident involving Emmett. Caleb was already grabbing his keys. What kind of incident? Is he hurt? He's not physically injured, but there was an altercation during lunch. Some older students were, well, perhaps it's better if we discuss this in person. 20 minutes later, Caleb sat in the principal's office across from his son, whose usually bright demeanor had been replaced by a sullen anger that reminded him painfully of the months after Rachel's death. "What happened, buddy?" Caleb asked. Gently, Principal Davidson answered instead. Some sixth graders were apparently taunting Emmett about a news article they'd seen online. When he tried to defend you, the situation escalated into a physical confrontation. What news article? The principal handed him a printout from a local gossip blog. Gold digger or success story? Local mechanics' meteoric rise raises questions, Caleb scanned the article, his anger building with each paragraph. It was filled with innuendo about his relationship with Claire, suggestions that he was using his position to gain access to her wealth, and quotes from unnamed industry sources questioning his qualifications and integrity. The boys were calling Dad a fake and saying he was only famous because he's dating a rich lady, Emmett said quietly. They said everyone knows he's not really qualified for his job. Caleb knelt beside his son's chair. "And what did you do?" I told them they didn't know what they were talking about. That Dad is the best mechanic in the world, and he earned everything he's got. Emmett's voice cracked slightly. "But when Tommy Henderson said you were just Mum's replacement's sugar daddy, I hit him." The phone in Caleb's pocket buzzed with an urgent call from Daniel Morrison, but he ignored it. His son was more important than whatever crisis was developing at the office. "Emmett, I need you to listen to me," Caleb said, taking his son's hands. "Some people are going to say things about us that aren't true. They're going to try to make you doubt what you know about our family, about me, about the life we're building. Are you really dating Ms. Cooper?" The direct question caught Caleb off guard. "Claire and I have become close friends. She's helped us in ways I never imagined possible. But what's between us isn't anyone else's business. Do you like her?" Caleb thought about Claire's warmth during the blizzard, her belief in his abilities, the way she'd stood by him during Kellerman's attacks. "Yes, I like her very much." "Then why does it matter what other people think?" "It doesn't. But sometimes other people's opinions can affect our opportunities, our friendships, even our family. That's not fair, but it's reality." Principal Davidson cleared his throat. "Mr. Reese, I understand this is a difficult situation for your family, but Emmett did strike another student. We have a zero-tolerance policy on violence." "What does that mean?" 3-day suspension, and I'll need to file a report with the district. Given the publicity surrounding your family lately, this incident will likely be noted in Emmett's permanent record. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Even Emmett's school record was being poisoned by Kellerman's campaign. They drove home. Caleb's phone finally rang with a call he couldn't ignore. Claire's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Where are you? We have a serious problem. I'm dealing with a family situation. What's wrong?" "Ford has officially withdrawn from the partnership. Tesla is postponing their involvement pending resolution of what they're calling leadership concerns. And the State Regulatory Commission has opened an investigation into our construction permits." Caleb pulled into his driveway, waving Emmett toward the house. Investigation into what? Anonymous complaints about environmental impact, safety protocols, and zoning compliance. All filed within the past 48 hours, all raising issues that were thoroughly vetted months ago. Kellerman? Has to be, but he's covering his tracks well. Everything appears to be coming from different sources: concerned citizens, environmental groups, industry watchdogs. Caleb sat in his truck, feeling the weight of the morning's events pressing down on him. "Claire, maybe we should consider..." "Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't even think about giving up. That's exactly what he wants. This isn't just about me anymore. They're going after Emmett now. He got suspended from school today because he was defending me against kids who were repeating Kellerman's lies. The silence on the other end of the call stretched long enough that Caleb wondered if they'd been disconnected. "I'm coming over," Claire said finally. "You don't need to—" "Yes, I do. We're in this together, Caleb. All of it." An hour later, Claire sat at Caleb's kitchen table while Emmett showed her his collection of automotive magazines, seemingly unaware of the crisis swirling around them. She'd arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking more like the woman he'd met during the blizzard than the corporate executive who commanded billion-dollar empires. "He's amazing," she said quietly, as Emmett explained the difference between various engine configurations. "Rachel would be so proud of the young man he's becoming." "How do you know about Rachel?" Claire smiled sadly. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. When my father died, I was Emmett's age, and people said terrible things about my mother's struggle to keep our family together. I know what it's like to have your family become a public target." "What did your mother do?" she fought back. "Not with lawyers or public relations campaigns, but by proving them wrong, by showing everyone that character matters more than circumstances, that good people don't stay down when others try to knock them down." Claire reached across the table and took Caleb's hand. "Marcus Kellerman thinks he can break us by attacking what we care about most. Your son, your reputation, the project we've built together. But he's made a fundamental miscalculation." "What's that?" "He thinks we're playing his game by his rules. But we're not. We're playing a completely different game, one where the goal isn't just to win, but to prove that winning doesn't require destroying other people." That evening, after Claire had left and Emmett had gone to bed, Caleb sat in his living room surrounded by newspapers, magazines, and printouts of online articles, all chronicling the systematic destruction of everything he'd worked to build. Over the past month, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Smart people know when to cut their losses. Walk away now, and this all stops. Keep fighting, and it gets much worse." Caleb stared at the message for a long time, thinking about Emmett's suspension, about the partnerships crumbling, about the investigation that could delay or kill the entire project. Then he thought about Claire's father, about Rachel's voice telling him that good things happen to good people, about the choice between safety and standing up for what was right. He deleted the text without responding and began drafting an email to Daniel Morrison with a simple subject line: "It's time to fight back." Because Marcus Kellerman was about to learn that some people can't be intimidated into giving up on their dreams, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them. 6 months later, Caleb stood in the main service bay of the Riverside Automotive campus, watching as the morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the rolling hills beyond the city. The facility was everything Claire had envisioned and more, a perfect blend of cutting-edge technology and traditional craftsmanship that had already become a model for automotive service centers across the country. But the real victory wasn't the building itself. It was the people working inside it. "Mr. Reese," called out Jessica Martinez, one of the apprentices from the training program. "The Tesla diagnostic station is showing some unusual readings on the battery management system. Could you take a look?" Caleb smiled as he walked over to help. 6 months ago, Jessica had been working at a quick lube chain, frustrated by the lack of opportunity to develop real technical skills. Now she was part of the most advanced automotive service team in the region, learning everything from traditional engine repair to electric vehicle systems. "What do you think the problem might be?" Caleb asked, standing beside her at the diagnostic. "Computer. Based on these voltage patterns, I'm thinking it could be a failing cell in the battery pack, but the computer isn't giving us a definitive error code." "Good analysis. What's your next step?" "Manual inspection of the physical connections. Then a thermal imaging scan to look for hotspots that might indicate internal resistance. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of thinking that separates great technicians from button pushers. As Jessica began her detailed inspection, Caleb reflected on how the battle with Marcus Kellerman had ultimately been won not through corporate maneuvering or legal strategies, but through something much simpler: excellence. The turning point had come when one of Kellerman's own customers, a prominent local businessman whose vintage Porsche had been damaged during routine service at a Kellerman facility, brought his car to the Riverside campus for repair. Word spread quickly through the automotive community about the quality of the restoration work, and soon customers were specifically requesting to have their high-end vehicles serviced at Caleb's facility rather than the corporate chains. Within 3 months, the waiting list for appointments had grown so long that they'd had to implement a reservation system. Automotive manufacturers had begun sending their own executives to observe the training programs. The federal government had not only approved the apprenticeship funding, but had increased it substantially after a delegation of senators toured the facility. Most importantly, Marcus Kellerman's carefully constructed narrative about corporate efficiency versus independent quality had collapsed under the weight of actual results. "Dad!" Emmett's voice echoed across the service bay as he bounded through the entrance, still wearing his school backpack. At 12 years old, he had grown confident and articulate, showing no lasting effects from the playground confrontations of the previous year. "How was school, buddy?" "Great," Mrs. Patterson said. "I can interview you for my career report. I want to write about how you went from fixing cars in a small garage to running the coolest automotive facility in the country." Caleb ruffled his son's hair. "And what conclusion have you reached about that career path?" Emmett grinned. "That sometimes the most important thing is just being willing to help people, even when it's inconvenient. That's pretty wise for a 12-year-old. I learned it from my dad." As Emmett headed to the break room to start his homework, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Boardroom, 5 minutes. Big news." Caleb found Claire in the executive conference room, but she wasn't alone. Daniel Morrison was there, along with Sarah Chen from Tesla and Michael Harrison from Ford. The expressions around the table ranged from excited to amazed. "What's going on?" Caleb asked, taking his usual seat. Claire slid a folder across the table. To him, "Ford and Tesla have officially announced a joint venture to license our operational model for implementation at 200 service centers across North America over the next 5 years." Caleb opened the folder and stared at licensing agreements, royalty projections, and expansion timelines that would transform their regional success story into a continental revolution in automotive service. "The Department of Transportation wants to fund expansion to 500 locations," Michael Harrison added. "They're calling it the National Automotive Excellence Initiative. And Congress is considering legislation that would provide tax incentives for businesses that adopt our apprenticeship model," Sarah Chen continued. "You've essentially created the blueprint for revitalizing skilled trades education in this country." Caleb looked around the table at the faces of people who had believed in his vision when it was nothing more than a conversation in a tow truck during a blizzard. "This started with a broken radiator hose," Claire laughed. "No, it started with someone who was willing to drive through a storm to help a stranger. Everything else just followed from that." Later that evening, Caleb and Claire stood on the observation deck of the facility's training center, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The parking lot below was empty except for their cars, and the peaceful silence felt like a stark contrast to the chaos and conflict of the past year. "Any regrets?" Claire asked. Caleb thought about the question seriously. The past year had been the most challenging and rewarding of his life. He'd been attacked in the press, questioned by federal investigators, and forced to defend his character against people who had never met him. But he'd also watched his vision become reality, seen young people develop skills that would serve them for life, and proven that quality and integrity could triumph over corporate cynicism. "None," he said finally. "Well, maybe one." "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize I was capable of something like this." Claire moved closer, and Caleb felt the same sense of possibility he'd experienced during their first conversation in his truck cab. "And what about us? Any regrets there?" Caleb turned to face her, seeing not the billionaire executive who commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, but the woman who had trusted him with her vision and stood by him when others questioned. "His worth, only that it took a blizzard and a broken car for me to meet you." Claire smiled, the same warm, genuine expression that had captivated him from the beginning. "I don't know. I think the universe has pretty good timing when it comes to bringing the right people together." As they stood together watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle in the growing darkness, Caleb reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a struggling single father, wondering if he could keep his small garage open another month. Now, he was the director of a facility that was changing an entire industry, the father of a confident, thriving young man, and the partner of a woman who had seen potential in him that he'd never recognized in himself. The keys Claire had handed him that day after the blizzard hadn't just unlocked the door to a mansion. They'd unlocked possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. "So what's next?" Caleb asked. Claire grinned, and he could see the same adventurous spirit that had driven her to build an empire from nothing. "Well, I've been looking at some properties in Europe. Apparently they could use a few automotive service centers that prioritize craftsmanship over convenience." Caleb laughed, realizing that his extraordinary life was just getting started. "In that case, I'd better brush up on my languages." As they walked back toward the building together, past the apprentice workshops, where tomorrow's automotive technicians were learning skills that would serve them for decades, Caleb understood that the most important lesson of the past year wasn't about business success or industry transformation. It was about what could happen when good people refuse to settle for less than they deserve. When they have the courage to help others and the wisdom to accept help in return. And when they remember that the most extraordinary opportunities often begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Because sometimes fixing a stranger's car in a snowstorm really can change the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.